Hello and welcome back to the second part of the Bones and Statues episode. In the last video we made a few bone piles, like the one you can see here, and in this part we'll take a look at how to make a couple of different statues, so something like this one. So yeah, let's get started. Okay then, so just like in the previous video, for the first half of this one we'll be concentrating on getting all the little bits and pieces ready for assembly, and in the second half we'll then start putting it all together. So the first thing we'll need to do is measure out a 1 1/8 strip of one of the main textures and then cut that to size. And while we're at it, we'll also cut out the other main texture, but for this one we'll leave it exactly as it is. And as you can see, I've also trimmed off the ends as well. Okay, we'll be using the smaller of the two as the main torso, so the next thing we need to do is cut out a 1 1/2 inch strip. And we're going to be wrapping that around a large milkshake straw, so after we've roughed up the surface of the straw with some sandpaper, we can then glue the texture in place. And there we go, something like that. Then we can take the full-size texture, and we'll be using this one to make the cloak, so we'll cut out a roughly 2-inch length. And we'll be gluing this to an empty toilet roll tube, but first we'll need to make sure that we've cut these two edges here at a right angle. Okay, so we'll apply some glue to the back of the texture, and when we're gluing it in place, we're going to try and wrap roughly half around one side and half around the other, and we'll try to make sure that the bottom of the texture lines up with the edge of the tube. So, something like this. Next, we'll cut out the heads, and as you can see, there's both a helmeted version and a hooded version. So, just like the skulls in part 1, we'll leave a bit of excess paper along the top and bottom, but we'll cut just inside the lines on both sides. Then we'll rough up the surface of a normal drinking straw, apply some glue to the back of the texture, and wrap them both around the straw. It's pretty straightforward stuff, really. Okay, so there they are, now they've been glued in place. For this next part, we'll just cut out the 3 remaining pieces. So that's the shield, the axe head, and finally the wings. So starting with the wings, we'll first need to fold them in half, just to get an idea of the midpoint, and just like the rib cage we made last time, we're going to fold them over the end of the tube, with the aim of trying to get the pattern to match on both sides. Then we can apply some glue to the back of the shield, and once again we'll take advantage of the tube's natural curve. Okay, the axe head works in a similar way to the wings, but this time we'll be gluing it to some thin cardboard instead. So something like this. Now, if you remember, we should still have a thin strip of the stone texture left over, and we're going to put that to use. So the first thing we need to do is trim off the excess, and then simply cut it in half. Then we'll take one of those pieces and stick it to some thin cardboard, and we'll be using this for the tops of the heads and things like that. And finally, we'll take this last half and cut it into quarters. And each of these should be just enough to wrap around a toothpick, which we can then use as the staves or the handles of the weapons. There we go. Now we just need to put all of these things to one side to dry. Okay, now everything's dried, we'll start things off with the angel statue. And the first thing we're going to do is take the torso piece and fold it in half. Then we'll cut the bottom off straight. There we go. And luckily this is not being filmed in 3D. And we'll then cut the top at a slight angle. And we're probably taking around 1/8 of an inch off the front. So something like this. So I'll just unsquash that, and next we'll need a rough idea of the size of piece that we'll be gluing on top, and ideally we'd like this to be a tiny bit bigger than the straw itself. So this top piece will be cut from the excess stone texture that we glued to some thin cardboard, and in this instance I'll be cutting out an 11mm diameter circle, though obviously the straws you use might be a slightly different size. Anyway, once it's been cut out, we can then add some hot glue to the inside of the straw and then glue the piece in place. So something like this. Next, we'll take the hooded head, fold that in half, and then trim the bottom to size. But when we trim the top, we'll cut this end at a slight angle, so it's kind of similar to what we did with the skull in the previous video. And if I just open that back out, you can see the kind of thing we're aiming for. Okay, so for the top, we'll take the plain texture again, punch out a small circle with a hole punch, and then use the end of a paintbrush or similar to give the circle a slight domed shape. Then we can add a spot of hot glue to the inside of the straw and glue the top in place. And it should end up looking something like this. Right then, now that that's done, we can glue the head to the torso, and it's just a simple matter of using a tiny spot of hot glue to stick it in place. But if you remember, we cut the top of the torso at a slight angle, so the idea here is to use the shorter side as the front of the statue. So there you go. This is how it should look at this stage. Okay, next we'll cut out the wings, and the only thing we need to be aware of here is the fact that we might not have aligned the images perfectly on both sides, so once we've cut out one side, we'll check the reverse and cut off any bits of plain paper that's still visible. And there you go. You can also see how we've used the curve of the toilet roll tube. Then we can apply some hot glue to the middle of the wings, like so, and then stick them to the back of the statue. And there you have it. It's finally starting to take shape. Okay, now it's time for the shield, and once we've cut it out, all we really need to do is add a generous blob of hot glue to one side of the statue, like so, and then simply stick the shield down in place. There's not much more I can say about that. But in the statue's other hand, we'll put a staff. So for this, we'll take the texture-covered toothpick, trim off one end, and then cut it to a length of 1.5 inches. There we go. Now you may have noticed that we've still got one texture left that we've not used yet, and this is for the hand. So we'll cut out a roughly 2-inch section, and we're then going to trim that so that it's 4 fingers wide. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the texture, you'll see lines running horizontally. And each of these pieces here are meant to represent 1 finger, so obviously we'll need to cut 4 fingers. So something like what you can see here. Then we'll take the trusty glue stick, apply some glue to the back, and then we'll wrap it around the centre of the toothpick. And when we're done, it should look something like this. Next, we'll apply a bit of hot glue to the hand itself, like that, and then we'll position it so that the end of the staff is level with the bottom of the torso. And that looks about right. And if everything's gone according to plan, we should end up with something like that. But we're not quite done yet, and next we're going to add a plinth to the bottom. And for this, we'll be using a piece of thin corrugated cardboard that's been cut into a 1-inch square, and also a piece of foam board that's been cut into a 3/4 of an inch square. And we're going to be wrapping those in some of the stone texture from the Pillars PDF. So I'll speed this part up while I'm doing that, but you might have noticed that when I've cut out the cardboard piece, I've done that at a 45-degree angle to the corrugation, just to make all of the edges that little bit stronger. But yeah, other than that, there's nothing special here. Anyway, once that's done, all we need to do next is glue the smaller one on top of the larger one, and then, using the glue gun, simply glue the statue in the centre. And there you go, here's the finished piece. It might not look as nice as a miniature painted up as a statue, but it should still do the job nicely. Okay then, so that's the angel done, now for the warrior statue. And a lot of this stuff is going to be very similar, so first we'll make the torso in exactly the same way, with the bottom cut straight and the top at a slight angle. But for this one, we'll be using the texture that we glued to both sides of the toilet roll tube to make a cloak. So here I am positioning the torso so that the back, i.e. the longer side, is pressed against the inner curve of the tube, and then just making a fold where the torso ends. It's a little hard to show that here, but it should look something like this. Okay, so if I just get this into a better position first, next we're going to draw a semicircle on the underside of this folded end, and we're going to make that a little bit bigger than the drinking straw. So there we go, something like that. Then we can draw a couple of lines from the semicircle down to the bottom corners, like so, and then cut out this shape with a sharp pair of scissors. And now this is what it should look like. Okay then, next we'll apply a line of hot glue to the back of the torso, and then stick it to the centre of the cloak. Then we'll add a generous amount of hot glue to the inside of the straw, and fold the top part of the cloak into place. And when the glue's set, it should look like this, though we can also bend the sides in a little, like you can see here, and maybe even bend the very corners slightly outwards. And there you go. Okay, now for the head, and this time we'll trim the top to size, like so, and then, you guessed it, we'll cut the bottom at a slight angle. Next, we'll punch out a small circle from the stone texture again, and then glue that to the top of the helmet. Then, all we need to do is apply some more glue to the bottom, and simply glue it in place on top of the torso. And there you go, that's the main part of the statue done. Okay then, the next few pieces, the shield and the staff, are exactly the same as the angel statue, so I've really speeded this part up, as I'm sure there's no real need to cover all of that again. But when we're done, we should end up with something like this. However, we are going to make the staff into some kind of polearm by adding the axe head shape to the top. So I'll just quickly cut that out, and then all we need to do is glue the axe head somewhere near the top. And there you go. That's all there is to it. Right then, to finish things off, we just need to glue the whole thing to a plinth, just like we did earlier. And once that's done, there's our completed statue. So yeah, that's how we can make a few different statues, though you can of course mix and match the pieces however you like. Anyway, as always, I'll end with a picture of these new pieces in action, and if you're finding this stuff useful, remember to hit the like button and all that other good stuff. So, all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.